Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Music Den. I'm your host Armando Venditti. Hoping you guys are having a good day. Ladies and gentlemen, the gang and I are back with another episode of 30th album anniversaries. But this is a special episode. Before I get into the topic of this episode, I want to welcome back to the channel Jim Bricker. How's it going, Jim?
Hey Armando, I'm doing pretty well, sir. I'm happy to be back with you and with what's his name down there too? Is it Frack?
I, I guess so. Yes, yes.
Sure. All right.
I've been
The one
called
and
worse.
only, the one and only Frack, otherwise known as Ken Cheshire. How's it going, Ken?
Going well. It's good to see you guys and good to talk music.
Good to be seen by you. Good to talk music. Now,
We'll
ladies
see
and
after this
gentlemen,
episode if it's still good to talk music.
we are back with
Wow.
30th album anniversaries. This is a special episode that we are going to be bringing to you. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, it's been one of those days already. Only one coffee. This was an idea of Jim's, but I will set this up for you. The artist in question is Bjork, ex of the Sugar Cubes, from Iceland. And we are going to be discussing her sophomore release, Post, released June 12th, 1995, through One Little Indian and Elektra Records and also Polydor. Has a playing time of 46 minutes and 2 seconds exactly. It's listed as art pop, avant pop, sorry, experimental pop. And upon release, this album reached number 4 on the Canadian charts and number 32 on the American charts. So it fared better in Canada than it did America. Overall, this album, I do believe, had 6 singles released from it.
Just what you love to hear.
And, well, yes, yes, exactly. Basically, half the album has been released as singles. There's 11 tracks on the album. And this album has sold a whopping 3 million copies worldwide. Her solo release debut, fared slightly better at 4 million copies sold worldwide. The album was produced by Bjork, Nelly Hooper, who had also worked with Madonna at this point on Bedtime Stories, who also produced the album, Graham Massey, Tricky, and Howie B. This album is, I'm not going to say eclectic because to me, the album does heavily uh, uh, weigh on the electronica side of things. But there are a mixture of styles on this album. So that is my spiel. I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to Jim, and he's going to talk to us about why he felt it was so appropriate to discuss this album.
Okay, yeah, lay the blame on me. So,
Not my
On the
fault.
board.
collectively,
Not my fault. Go on.
collectively, we had decided for our album anniversary series, it's like, okay, let's just cut things off at the 1980s. I think I put my co-hosts through too much torture talking about Mob Depp,
You did.
and
You
and I
did.
think that was the point where we sort of lost the plot. However, I having a I don't know, some kind of little fit, I said, wait a minute, guys, wait. There's at least two albums that we still have to talk about in the 90s that are really, really important. This is
Two.
one of them. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, this is one of them, and we'll do another one as it gets to that time. We've discussed it. You just don't remember at this point, which is
Mhm.
okay. There's a
Okay.
lot of stuff to remember. So anyway, yes, we are talking about post Bjork's second album. Um, this is something that was introduced to me by my son. I had heard of Bjork and kind of placed it in sort of the weird art rock electronica category and just didn't really ever sort of go there. Because this came out at a time like, oh, after I had just gotten married and just was sort of getting settled into, it's like, okay, these are my musical lanes. I'm going to stay in my lanes. These are about, all I have time to sort of devote to. So I'm just going to focus on that. Um, However, being introduced to this, wow, head blew off of my body. It was just amazing. Um, Armando's right where it's tempting to call this eclectic, but it's not. It's diverse, but I don't think it's eclectic. I think we've talked about many other albums that have a lot more um, eclecticness than this one. The categories that you read, I agree with. Um, However, when I look at Discogs on this album, um, it says as a genre, this could fit in with electronic, jazz, and
Yeah,
pop.
yeah.
From a style standpoint, it lists trip hop, IDM, experimental, down tempo, big band, big beat, and left field. Now, these are all genres, and you're free to go look them up on Discogs and see what other albums kind of go in there. But I'm grabbing a piece of text here from the Great Big Encyclopedia in the Sky that talks about post a little bit more, saying that it touches on various musical styles, including industrial, big band jazz, trip hop, chill out, and experimental. Jim Farber, in reviewing the album for Entertainment Weekly when it came out in 1995, considered Post to be, quote, a connecting point between industrial disco, ambient trance, and catchy synth pop. It makes a lot of sense to me why it would fit into those categories. Um,
Okay.
you're right. In the US, it only went to 32. It was top 10, though, in Iceland, Australia, Scotland, Sweden, UK, Belgium, Finland, Canada, Denmark, New Zealand, Norway, Netherlands, France, Germany, Switzerland, Ireland, and Portugal. So clearly, those guys were a lot more hip to what was going on with kind of the burgeoning industrial dance scene at the time.
I will say that the singles for the videos, or the videos for the singles, were all over Much Music, like played
Mhm.
ad nauseum. Oh, it's all so quiet yet again. Like, so yeah, this album was all over the place when it came out. It was big. It was
It's
big.
So Quiet was actually the first song that I heard when my son played the album for me. We were in the car and it's like, okay, we're just going to start with track four. So we put on It's So Quiet and I'm just like, what? This is not the Bjork that I had been led to expect. And then right afterwards, when it goes into Enjoy, I'm like, okay, that's the Bjork that I was expecting. And holy crap, is it great? Just the whole connection of It's So Quiet into Enjoy and the stylistic, meshing of everything I thought was just absolutely fantastic.
Okay,
So
did you want to go track by track or just
I
why?
did want to go track by track, and I
Go
was going to
ahead.
kind of start off. Now, the other thing I'll mention regarding the album, not only did it have six singles released, but there was a remix LP of all the B-sides and remixes called Telegram that came out in 1996. So, um, more for people to kind of seek out if they really, really like what's on this album. And I think this album is just it's an A, if not an A plus. I am so delighted with this record. It's different than the normal stuff that I go to, but wow, when I get into it, I just think it's fantastic. So, given all the stylistic things I've we've been mentioning here, let's just kind of get into Army of Me, which is the lead-off track. I have seen the video for it. I never saw it back in its context in 1995 when it came out, but I think Spike Jonze directed the video for Army of Me, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so,
Um,
yes. And I should point out, just to point something out, the rhythm track, or the backing track, part of it is based on a loop sample of the drum track from When the Levee Breaks from Led Zeppelin. So, and it's listed there in the
you
credits. Yeah,
you never know it,
yeah,
just by hearing it that was when the levee breaks. But that's the, interesting thing about sampling at this time is that they were really starting to mess with tempo and adding other effects to things. So there could be a sample of something and you're like completely clueless,
yeah. Until I
like
read
I
that,
was of what was there.
until I did my research, I did know that. But yeah,
Yeah. So Army of Me is, oh, what's the right phrase for it? it kind of is a pretty bold statement right out of the gate about where this album is going. It's all attitude. It's just a kind of this powerful statement of someone who's had enough. You know, if you've complained to me once more, you'll meet an army of me. Um, Bjork's delivery can be a little bit difficult to get used to. Um, and
No.
sometimes, it's very, yeah, Ken gets it and Armando gets it. And it's even interesting on the songs when she's singing Icelandic. It was hard for me to figure out, okay, is she singing English and it's just weirdly phrased, or is she singing another language? And it turns out in that instance, it's another language. But I love the fact that the vocal delivery is so clear on this right out of the gate. It kind of um, reduces the barrier to entry that this album might have to a newbie, just because it's like, okay, you can follow what she's saying. She's not kind of, following ghastly scales, to quote Amadeus. Um, but yeah, it's just really straightforward. Now, Armando, I'm guessing that you were familiar with this from its Much Music days, and I'm guessing, Ken, this is like totally new to you. Do I have that right?
Not totally, but yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, again, this album was all over Much Music. All over Much. They promoted the shit out of this album when it came out. It was just, yeah. Um, whether you wanted to know it or not, you knew it. So, but
Gotcha. Ken, I mean, do you want to talk about it kind of track by track or just react at the end or?
I'll keep going. I'll just react at the end.
Okay. Um, Second track, Hyper Ballad, it's not 180 degrees. It's certainly slowed down in tempo until you get to about the chorus and the middle section and things sort of pick up again. But this is just, whereas Army of Me is like in your face, Hyper Ballad is just kind of very vulnerable and emotional and naked and kind of haunting in the lyrics and what she's talking about. She's lyrically, she's talking about, she's camping out with someone and she's going to the edge of the mountainside in the morning and throwing little things off the mountain so she can hear them sort of clatter all the way down and crash at the bottom. And she says that she's doing this so she can feel safe again. Now, I don't get the emotional connection to that, but I remember mentioning um, to a friend of mine who happened to be like a 50-year-old woman at the time, and I'm like, "Do you get what she's saying?" And she's like, "Yeah, I get it. I totally understand what she's talking about in this lyric." I'm like, "Okay, so maybe it's some sort of feminine thing." I don't know. Not going to pretend to understand, but with this low end bass line that just permeates this song and this kind of shuffling percussion that happens all the way through, and just the way things sort of keep ramping up as she keeps throwing things off and proclaiming how free she is. It's just a completely mesmerizing track. I'm thinking Hyper Ballad was one of the six singles, right, Armando?
yes, I do believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You're doing
Um,
good. You're doing really good.
oh, well, thanks. Turns out I've done about 160 of these episodes, so I hope I've dialed it in.
There's nothing like self-promotion, ladies and gentlemen. No,
Well, I'm just saying.
I will say this, and then I will shut up for a bit. But in reading up on the album, I did I did find it interesting and surprising how certain songs like Army of Me was conceived and written in an afternoon and recorded in an afternoon.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
whereas other songs like Hyper Ballad and the modern things, and it's oh so quiet, took longer, like, weeks or even a couple of from a couple of days to like weeks to get everything together. So
Yeah.
it's this album is quite interesting in those facts alone. So
Hmm.
I get it. I
Yeah,
get it.
so some of it was like really organic, and some of it you really had to sort of pull stuff out. It sounds like.
Yeah, like again, or made me I think it was Tricky that she worked on that with. It was written and recorded in one afternoon, like one day kind of thing. She got the idea in the morning, and they obviously did the recording, and she just sort of did the vocal in one or two takes. It was just like boom, and they were ready to go. So I did find that quite interesting, actually.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's neat when an album can happen just real organically like that.
mhm.
Um, you mentioned Modern Things. That's track three, another awesome bass line with this sort of galloping and sometimes, marching sort of drum beat to it. It's got this great fade out with sort of the record skip vocal. And it gets into Oh So Quiet, which, by the way, did you guys happen to sort of research the original from 1951?
No.
It's a very, very faithful cover. I mean, obviously, modern production techniques between 1995 and 1951 are, they are what they are, but it's very faithful to the OG by a woman named Betty Hutton. And it's, all big brass and swing drums. And, you
Hmm.
know, Bjork is, like I said, incredibly faithful to the original. So, don't
Yeah.
think that she's like reinterpreted it. There's clearly something about that just delighted her to no end and felt she needed to include it. And then it gets into Enjoy, which is this kind of, it's called Enjoy, but this music has this just relentlessness, this churning that kind of, and the whole soundscape of the song, you go from this swinging big band brass head fake of a song of It's So Quiet into Enjoy. And you couldn't imagine two more polar opposite songs to kind of work the woofers and tweeters of your stereo. I mean, this
Hmm.
song is this whole other level of, putting putting your sonic equipment through its paces. And, this is a good point to say is that the best way to hear this album is not through your phone. Um, Put it on the highest quality hi-fi that you've got, or listen to it on the best set of headphones that you've got, and just take this thing in because it is just, I don't know if it's a masterpiece of production, but it's absolutely fantastic. It's an incredibly immersive record. Um, and
Okay.
then the album kind of it doesn't it doesn't weaken, but it sort of gets into these sections where you kind of have these tender, low key kind of tunes, and then they get, kind of more percussive, or I'll call it hallucinatory. You've Been Flirting Again is this short, soft tune that leads into this song called Isabel, which is this like hallucinatory audio fantasy of brass strings, Indian percussion. Um, it's just wild. And then again, it starts happening again. Possibly, maybe is this ballad with this incredible vibe, with this just gentle Rhodes piano and this sort of um, telephone dial, modem sound in the background. Um, then it gets into, I Miss You, these big dance floor beats and bongos and horn stabs and this great trumpet solo at the end. And then you get to the last two tracks, Cover Me, which is just orchestral. There's a harp. It's just very exotic. And then the album ends on the last track called Headphones, which is not a over the top dance floor piece, but it's kind of this tone poem with this really deep bass that's going on through the end of
And
it. And I just thought,
it
go
does have
ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, headphones has a pulsating quality to it.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
all
think it
I
was
was gonna, that's all
it's
I
an
was gonna
interesting
say. Yeah.
choice. Yeah, interesting choice to end the album because it's you would think it would be more up tempo, but I mean clearly this is um, Bjork was quoted as saying, whereas debut has a more gentle energy. Um, Post is more raw and more brutal, and definitely so. I mean, there's one of the lines in Isabel says, "In a tower of steel, nature forges a deal to raise wonderful hell like me, like me." And I can read that in a couple of different ways. Is the
You
like me
can.
means that, yeah, is the like me that she's kind of in a tower that's impenetrable, and she's forging something that's just going to go out and cause wonderful hell? Or is she kind of the product of the wonderful hell that's been raised in this tower of steel, by nature? Um, there's a lot going on in this record, um, emotionally and relationally. And again, I'm not going to play psychologist through this, but it's it's interesting to kind of go through the lyrics and take all this in the midst of this music that's, like we said, all over the place. It's trip hop, experimental, down tempo, big band, orchestral. I mean, it's a pretty amazing piece of work, and this has led me to check out other Bjork albums. And this is definitely my favorite of all of them I've heard. Um, some of them get a little too weird for me. Um, I think Vespertine is a great album, though. That's mostly orchestral. I'd put that as my second favorite Bjork album, but I think this album is just a highlight of 1995. I can see why people loved it on the continent, um, and how, by the same token, it wasn't really ready for U.S. ears at that time. But in hindsight, I think it's just an absolute standout.
Ken, your views on this album?
Yeah, I was familiar with It's Oh So Quiet. I remember seeing the video. Um, and it stuck with me. I can still have little bits and pieces, I see it in my brain. If for our listeners, if Michael McDonald is the height of rock and roll for you, you might want to fix a drink, to sit and listen to this, because it's not. Um, I wasn't really familiar with her works before this. Um, I had a pretty good idea of what to expect when I started listening to this. In listening to it, I realized that I have heard bits and pieces of this somewhere along the line. I just did not know that's who it was.
Yeah,
Um, the first thing that always strikes me is her vocal style. Um, in listening to it, my first note, I said spastic vocals. Um,
yeah.
she's very. I think her vocals are. I would use eclectic for her vocals on this. Um,
I can see that.
Definitely has her own style, but it's somewhat of a broad style. It's depending on the song. Um, I'm I'm not a big fan of when she growls, but it is used, um,
Mhm.
as a very strong emotional, and in a musical way. It certainly makes sense. This album has really compelling orchestrations. Um, uh, of course, the It's So So Quiet, especially with the big band style and whatever.
Mhm.
But it's used in the other songs I found very interesting. Um,
Mhm.
I find um, another note I have is Nightmare Love Songs. Jim, you talking about
I get that too. Yeah.
throwing things off the mountain.
Hmm.
There's a lot lyrically that I don't relate to, but then she and I are of different generations, so it only makes sense, and that's fine. Um,
Generations, cultures,
yeah. Oh yeah, the whole thing. I find much of the music um, melodic in the vocal lines, but sometimes I find that between the vocals and the her vocals and the instruments sometimes for me doesn't seem to fit one another.
you got
And
an
and
example?
I use my notes that are incompatible. Not specifically,
I think I know
it's
what you're
kind
talking
of an
about.
overall listening to it. It's like, but that just could be just the way that my ears are hearing it. Opening up with Army of Me, of all the styles that y'all have mentioned, uh, I I tend to lean heavily towards the category of a lot of industrial elements to
That
my
that is
Hmm.
that
or
is one
what
of the
I consider,
yeah,
industrial.
that is
And
one of the elements. Sorry, elements. That is one of the genres that is listed as well as industrial and
yeah, I mean, it's heavily electronic, but um, but I differentiate between heavily electronic and industrial. But for me,
Hmm.
this is either a combination of both or it's one or the other a lot in this album. Um,
Just a real quick question, Ken, when you think of electronic, do you think of more of like, Ultravox and Naked Eyes and stuff like that?
I think of electronic, yes, but I think for me, uh, electronic is leans more into the industrial aspect than just a lot of synthesizers.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
okay.
I'll think of an example when I'm trying to think of something else.
I know how that goes.
I can, a lot of the industrial music of the late '80s, um, particularly, um, it's it's very cold, but
Sure.
electronic is not necessarily um, cold.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I agree with what you said about hyper ballad. I found that the term I used was is very sparse sounding
Hmm.
is the way it struck me. Um, but yeah, and but then you've got songs, especially Enjoy. To me, um, that just struck me as in my brain as very industrial. I love electronic, like I say, I love Ultravox, The Hurting from Tears for Fears and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But even that stuff is with this that's so electronic. There's still I feel a human emotional element to the songs, but that's
Hmm.
not always the case for me with electronic.
Sure.
Um, so, but anyway, uh, it's a very interesting listen. I am curious to, revisit it after some, time. Um, I'm not sure. It makes me want to listen to some of her earlier stuff, um,
Hmm.
rather than the later stuff. Um, but yeah, for 1995, I can see the impact that this would have had on the industry, on listeners,
Yeah.
especially non-US, because like I said, this is not your dad's um yeah, it's it's different.
This is
But
not your
for
dad's
what it
rock
is,
and
it's
roll, is what he's trying to say. Like, this is not
yeah.
your
Well,
dad's
I'm
rock
not a
and roll.
big fan a lot of '90s music.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
the
yeah.
a lot of the '90s music that I like tends to lean back into the '80s, and
Yeah.
so but then I'm an old fart, so that it only makes sense.
Okay. Okay. Uh,
yeah. I mean, I guess what was popular in the '90s around this time, sort of thinking back, was a lot of rap was coming up. There was a lot of R&B. On the rock side, pretty much grunge and the Seattle metal sound had kind of taken over, and you still had bands out there like like Toad and the Gin Blossoms and Spin Doctors and things like that who are trying to have sort of a more organic-y rock and roll sort of thing. But
and in Canada, sorry, I'm just have to add this too. In Canada,
yeah,
you had bands like the Tragically Hip, rest in
yep,
peace, Gord Downey. You also had groups like, again, the Tea Party, who were releasing an album every other year from like 93 to 2000, every year, every other year. Continuing on the hard rock, Doors, Led Zeppelin vibe with the Middle Eastern influences, instrumentation, etc. So you had a cross section of music that was going on, in the
Yeah.
market, right? That was happening.
hmm
So you had a lot to choose
Well,
from at the
yeah,
time.
and honestly, I'm not against music in the '90s. There's for me a fair amount of stuff that I liked and I still do. We've got a series coming up later on in the year. Two of my all-time favorite albums are from the '90s. So you know, um, but like I said, it just depends on what it is. It's the way
Yeah.
it strikes. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I have to say, just to continue, basically, I guess with what you're saying, Ken, is that for me, like when I do shows, when we've done shows on like, favorite albums, like favorite albums of the 70s or hits of the 70s and 80s, I find that the closer you get to the 90s, the pickings are slim in terms of what you actually listen
Sure,
to, in terms of what you like to listen to.
sure.
sure.
And I mean, yes, I get what you're saying. There was a lot going on in the 90s, a lot of, I guess you'd say, cross-pollination in terms of
Mhm.
genres mixing
Right.
and just blurring the lines, in terms of what was played on the radio or played on music television at the time. So I get what you're saying. It's hard. I mean, with this album, if I can just put in my 4 cents, I guess you'd call it, with Bjork.
Please put in
Um,
a buck,
that's all I can afford. Um,
Canadian even.
exactly. This album, as I said, does, in my opinion, lean heavily on electronica. Does it lean too much on it in time? At times, yes, it does. I will say that there is an eclectic mix of music here in terms of styles. I mean, you have It's Also Quiet. Okay, I will say that in terms of the music overall, Bjork's vocals tend to sort of are almost like a step behind the music. She's almost like trying to catch up to the music with her vocal delivery, kind of like almost
Yeah.
like a half measure behind, of what's being heard or played. It's Also Quiet is the odd man out on the album in terms of the musical style, big band jazz. What gets me is when she screams at the end of the vocal, at the end of the verse line. It's like, did someone grab her by the ass and squeeze or what? I mean, like, in the studio. Is that why I mean, I know she's doing it for effect. I mean, but that's just something that,
Yeah.
like, it
Yeah.
just doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
Well, again, the funny thing is that it's not far off from the original. I mean,
Okay, I
obviously,
didn't
this
I didn't know
the
that.
the woman. sorry, Betty Hutton doesn't
Yeah,
sort of have Bjork's range, but there's still that thing that happens in the
yeah.
original. So
I can't even do it. Yeah.
It has that what, Jim?
not doing it again.
Okay,
Can't
Okay.
force it.
I tried.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not even touching that one. But I just it's I mean, I I can understand why they released so many singles from the album. I mean, if you look at the track listing, basically four tracks on side one and two on side two were released as singles.
Hmm.
I remember seeing "I Miss You," the video for it. I do like that song in terms of musically. Uh, the structure of the track. I just feel that at times, like Ken said, her vocals really don't match the music in terms of like what you
Hmm.
expect. And you know, that's fine. Everyone has their own opinion. In
Well,
terms of
certainly, just
music.
a comment on that, Armando, is that her vocal lines. I mean, it's not like most of the songs have an undergirding of guitar or piano or something that's kind of moving the chords along.
Yeah,
I mean, the chords are kind of implied sometimes by this really deep, synth bass that's sort of going on, but
yeah,
mostly it's all up to Bjork to sort of carry the melody on everything. I mean, there's other tunes like possibly maybe has this, beautiful Rhodes piano figure underneath it. But
yeah,
again, it's just sort of a counter melody to what, Bjork's doing vocally. And there's other tunes where it's got kind of a nice orchestral arrangement. Cover Me is the one that comes to mind on that. But yeah, mostly if there's a melody, it's all her. And
well,
everything else is just kind of rhythmic support.
also you mentioned orchestral elements. I'm thinking of also "You've Been Flirting Again" when you mentioned that,
Yep.
like that track as well. So
Yeah, that's a
um,
lovely track.
it 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 does musically go all over the map. I will say that. But with his roots basically planted in electronica music, which is fine. I mean, it is what it is.
Hmm.
For me, would this been an album have been an album that I would go back to? Um, Hand on heart, no.
Hmm.
In terms of its style, but you know, I mean, eclecticism is part of what music is too. So
Hmm.
you can't. You see, the thing is, you can't like everything the same. If you did, these episodes would be 5 minutes long. Oh, this is great. This is great. This is great. Okay, moving on next. Have a good day,
Yeah.
folks. You know, you'd move on. So,
Sure.
but I mean, I will give her credit for the fact that she's done whatever the hell she's wanted to do musically. She doesn't let any record company or management tell her what musical style she should be doing next. It's all up to her. She's in the driver's seat,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah,
Sure.
I mean, yeah, well, that's my 4 cents on a post.
So I would venture to guess that this doesn't compel you to check out any other Bjork albums.
Nope. Unfortunately, no.
Okay, there we go.
It's just not. I wouldn't put this in the same category as Black Midi. I'd pick this over Black Midi, okay? I'm gonna tell you, let me just put that out there, okay?
I'm glad we have a universal standard that we can all go back to.
There is actual effing musical structure here, okay, as opposed to Black Midi, okay? But I won't even. But I'm not one to gossip, so you didn't hear that from me. But yeah, it's not really an album I'd go to. I'd go back to. So,
Hmm.
but you know,
Yeah, I was just doing a quick look up when we were talking about like what else is considered electronic music during 1995. And there's a website called albumoftheyear.org that has done a pretty good job of organizing some of these things. You know, with the exception of the first artist on this list, who is Madonna, I don't know if I've heard of, a lot of these. Oval, Basic Channel, Cold Cut, I have heard of, but I don't think I would know one of their songs. Black Dog, Tricky, Aikui Mori, Ruby, um,
Bless you. Go
a
on.
bunch of stuff I can't even pronounce. Deaf Ambient, I can pronounce that. And, Bjork's Post is like number 20 on this list. It has a score of 87 as opposed to Madonna's Bedtime Story, which has a score of 100. So,
Which Bjork did contribute to musically.
okay, I
Okay.
did
Yeah.
not know that.
And
And
songwriting.
tricky on this album too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They were
Um,
all in the same wheelhouse.
yeah. Yeah. And if I can say anything about Madonna, I wish she'd just get out of the bloody electronic vein. She's been in that lane since like 1998. She hasn't switched.
Well,
But
she's been in other lanes and it hasn't really been too good for her as well. So,
well, no, I'm just saying. I mean, Mini Rat, when you come up, when you have a song in your album with the title of "Bitch, I'm Madonna," you're done. You're done. Fucking pack it up and go home.
Well,
You know what I mean? Like you're
for me,
done.
it's yeah, a lot of that for
I'm
me is just
sorry, but I
laziness.
had to. I'm sorry, but um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry, Kat. I didn't mean to cut you off. No, I mean Bjork. When this came out, again, this was everywhere. This was highly anticipated after debut.
right.
It did really well. 3 million copies sold worldwide. Six singles. It did good. It put her on the map.
Yep.
As did debut. But I mean, because of her background with the Sugar Cubes, it's just for me. It's just
Yeah.
it wasn't. I know
Yeah.
it's not. I'm gonna go back to him.
Yeah,
Well,
it
it's
does.
interesting that you
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
go, Ken. Ken, you first go.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't prompt me to listen to any of her uh albums after this, but it does make me curious about Sugar Cubes.
Okay.
And I know there's some of their stuff that I have heard. Um uh
I
so
think Happy
that
Birthday was
does
one
make
of
me
their
curious.
was like the big single from their breakthrough album, which is what Life's Too Good, if I
I
recall correctly.
And
I
we're
I
forgetting the
don't know.
yeah, and we're forgetting the other juggernaut that was released in 1995, Jagged Little Pill,
Sure.
Alanis
Well,
Morissette.
There's some
that's
screaming on
true.
that too. Yeah.
I mean, seven singles released from the album, and everyone, and album went on to sell 41 million copies
Hmm.
worldwide. You
Sure.
know,
Isn't it ironic?
there you go. And everyone thought that that was her debut release. It was her third release.
Yeah.
Would I listen to her MCA releases prior? No, because it's not my bag. It's not what I would listen to.
Yeah.
Uh, but and I mean, I'm noticing. I noticed just to wrap up my point. Too late. I know. But so much for a mini rant. I noticed when I was looking at Bjork's discography, every album seemed to sell less and less and less and less and less
Hmm.
worldwide, right? Uh, Same with Stevie Nicks. She comes out with Belladonna in '81. It's a massive hit. Everyone's all over her. She's the next best thing to break off from Fleetwood Mac. Every album sells less and less and less and less. Same with
Hmm.
Alanis Morissette. Jagged Little Pill comes out, 40 million, 41 million copies. Every album afterwards, less and less and less and less. It's like there's no formula to this in terms
No,
of
but yeah, I mean, you're right. It's no formula, but I think there's probably different reasons why things sold,
yeah,
less and less and less.
yeah, yeah.
Bjork continued to just kind of spin in whatever orbit she
She
artistically was
was.
interested in.
Yeah,
I think Stevie Nicks, her, I think the quality of her voice and the quality of the songs just really started to go downhill.
yeah,
And Alanis, of course, Alanis was everywhere, and even I couldn't avoid it in '95. But I think she was just like this supernova that happened in 95, and whatever happened after that, it's like, well, it's not Jagged Little Pill, so I don't like it. That's the public's reaction to it.
Well, don't get me wrong. I love Supposed Former Infatuation Junkie, the
Hmm.
follow-up to Jagged Little Pill and Under Rug Swept, whatever. I mean, I like those albums. It's just there was just something
Yeah.
about it that wasn't Jagged Little Pill. And does it that it doesn't make these albums bad. It just makes them. We're going off on a tangent, folks. I apologize. It doesn't make these albums bad. It just makes them different.
Hmm.
And it's sad to say every album should stand on its own merit, on its own qualities and what it has to offer. Unfortunately, that's not how the music business is looked at. Unfortunately, you know what I mean. But
Well,
I
the
will
whole
stand.
entertainment industry, there is um, there's a thing that's basically the perfect storm.
Yeah, yeah,
It's the
Hmm.
timing, it's the artist, it's the genre or
yeah,
style,
yeah.
it's the production,
But I
and
will. Sorry, go
and
ahead.
that can rarely be created intentionally. I mean,
That's true. That's true.
who'd have thought back in the 70s that just this niche artist named Peter Frampton would release a live album that changed the industry, a
Yeah,
double live album that changed the industry.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and some people feel it changed it for the worse, but it is what it is. And same thing with Rumors with Fleetwood Mac.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so so for the for the mid 90s, it only makes sense that you'd have, the Jagged Little Pill and this Bjork album. It just kind of, what happened. And
yeah.
so an artist,
Exactly.
and Armando is like, I remember when we were talking about U2 at one point, um, that the Joshua Tree was this huge
Juggernaut. Yeah,
thing when it came out. Just
yeah,
yeah, this Godzilla of an album.
yeah,
And then they followed that up with Octone Baby, and that was very, very different. And
Well, you're forgetting Rattle and Hum.
well, that's half studio, half live. So
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of yeah, that's
I
almost like
I
a
I
compilation.
support Ken. Yes, I
Yeah, that's
am.
that's fair.
But
So,
and Armando, as you're off to say, Achtung Baby was an album they had to make to take that next step.
yeah,
It's definitely, I am not a fan of that album, but the impact that it had and still has, is huge. So the
Yeah,
audience
and
and the artist, at some point, it runs right along, and so you like it. And then sometimes artists will go one way, and the listener goes the other.
exactly. Like
Um,
I've said before, I mean, and I won't just cap with what I just said. I do believe that Madonna should get out of the electronic lane. Bitch, your time is done. Move on. But getting back on this other topic now, um, I I always can make Jim laugh. Uh, for me, there are artists where if they have any type of longevity musically in terms of a career, like 10 years, 5 to 10 years, and they want to continue, there does come a point where they feel like their back's against the wall, and if they want to continue, they have to make a change. Genesis did it with Abacab. U2 did it with Achtung Baby. They had to make these changes in order to keep themselves interested and to keep their careers going, to keep the momentum going with the career. Otherwise,
mhm.
if Genesis, I say this 100%, if Genesis after Duke continued in what they were doing with, and then there were three and Wind and Wuthering, they would have petered out. They would have petered out. They had to do something that was going to do a complete right turn. With Abacab, they did that. They did that. And all of a sudden, they're having hits. and they were blasted for having hits, you know.
And a lot of bands have tried to do that, but I think the ones that are successful at it are the minority. Genesis tried to do it again with Calling All Stations. We know
Yeah.
how that went.
Or, I mean,
That's true.
I wouldn't even go there. But I mean, you look at an artist like David Bowie and even Alice Cooper to an extent, that when he went off and Alice Cooper, let's look at Alice Cooper. When he went off and did Welcome to My Nightmare, that was a concept album, one and only album for Atlantic Records and Anchor Records in Europe. Different styles, vaudeville, rock, ballads, but he felt he had to do something to separate himself from Alice Cooper, the band, I guess, just to do something different.
Mhm.
And David Bowie, every album he did was pretty much different in terms of
Pretty
musical
much.
style. So he was an artist I thought, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to do. If you guys want to come along for the ride, I'm right here. If you don't, I'll catch you next year because I'm going to be here. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
um,
and there are points like, Low and Heroes and Lodger where that really worked for him, and there's some where he just fell on his face, like Tonight and Never Let Me Down, you know?
and he would admit that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, he would admit that those two albums, Never Let Me Down and Tonight, and according to him, it annoyed him to his very core that he let other people arrange those albums for him, whereas he was always the one doing it, doing the musical arrangements, etc., the production. Um, but he, you know, again, was an artist that did whatever the hell he wanted to do at the time, and whether it fell whether he fell on his face or whether he was successful, it was on him. He made that decision.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yep. I would like to bring us back to the point, and I want to do that just
yes,
via one of the comments that Ken made.
yes.
Um, Achtung Baby, which was recorded in Berlin in like 90 and 91, has the same DNA as Bjork's Post does. It's this industrial electronic dance music that was happening in Europe, albeit Achtung Baby was filtered through, The Edge and Adam Clayton and, the rest of the band. And, Post is 5 years later. But again, it's that underground discotheque, dance movement that was happening in Europe that influenced, both of these records and probably hundreds more that escaped my notice at the time.
And I'll go one further. Octung Baby has a connection to uh, Heroes because when I hear
Well,
Zeus, the lead off track, Zeus Station, and the intro on that, the production on that, I'm thinking of David Bowie. I'm thinking of like Brian Eno because to me that it sounds a lot like Beauty and the Beast that leads off Heroes. There's a
mhm,
lot of production elements from Heroes that I hear on Nocturne Baby. As you said, there's that the 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 genesis of Post also lies in Nocturne Baby. So I'm like there's that connection there. So I guess you call
mhm.
it what, 6 degrees of separation? But I mean like
Something like that. Yeah.
yeah. So
Well, and I think that wherever you fall on Post, I think we can all agree that it's an easier and better listen to Lou Reed's Metal Machine music.
oh hell yes. Hell yes. Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yes. There's not
Yep.
even a contest there, not even a question of that, my dear boy. Uh, all right.
So
Go
there's
ahead.
one more connection that I want to make with the Post album.
Yes.
There was an album that came out in 1994, and I found out about it, about 10 years afterwards. An album that's called Renaissance, the Mix Collection. and it's by these two DJs out of England named Sasha and Digweed. And this is electronic house trance music. And I think this, if someone's looking for like the raw materials that informed what was going on in England at the time and what really informed post, I would recommend this album, just to sort of get in. And actually, it's pretty fun. I put it on if I'm in that right mood and I'm tapping my toes. I mean, it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's a dance album for a reason.
Oh,
It is three CDs, but it's a banger.
and I just got paid this weekend. Okay, cool. Um,
Get the 10th anniversary edition.
I plan to. Thank you, my dear boy. Thank you so much. All right,
There you go.
ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this extended um, stream of consciousness version episode of the can I say version episode of 30th album anniversaries, uh,
Certainly.
focusing on Bjork's post. We must get back on topic, ladies and gentlemen. You know what? If you love this album, if you know of this album, please put down your comments down below on this album. Like I've said, this album was all over Much Music in 1995 going forward. And this album did make a statement. It does have a benchmark, of mid 90s electronic music. So, again, please put down your comments below. I want to thank Frick and Frack, Jim and Ken, for coming along with me on this ride. And yes, this was Jim's idea. Thank you again, Jim, for this. And yeah, we tried to keep this short. It never fucking works. We
Whose
always
fault is
try.
that?
Not mine. Okay,
Said the man who brought up Madonna.
exactly, exactly. Get off the train, bitch. It's time. Anyways, moving on. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, again, please put down your comments below. And please click like and subscribe and do hit the notification bell to keep yourselves on top of any new content we've got coming up. And I'm going to
Listen
plug
to
the,
this album. Listen to
yes,
this album.
yes, please do. And I'm going to plug the shit out of this series that we're working on. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be doing a series called Going for the One, our favorite debut albums. It's going to be for the month of September, an episode a day. So please join us for this. Unfortunately, Bill Schuster will not be able to join us for this episode. He's got some personal issues going on. We miss you, Bill, but it's going to be the three of us bringing you our favorite debut albums, 30 in total for the month of September. That's going to be a hoot.
And again,
Yes.
I have to say favorite in quotes because there's one of these. Oh, it's a dog with fleas.
Oh, yes. Yes. And shit on the butt of the dog. Anyway, we won't even go there. But that's another. But I know the one. I think I know the one you're talking about. So please join us for that. That's coming up. We're looking forward to it. And we've got more ideas coming up for October and going forward. Believe me. Yes, yes, yes.
I can't think that far ahead, dude.
Oh, well, we have to. We have to. It's called progress, my dear boy.
Content.
Ladies,
Feed the algorithm.
exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, please look after yourselves and one another. And for Frick and Frack, Jim and Ken, I'm Armando signing off. And we will see you soon on the Music Den with more episodes. Bye for now.